Start your morning full of divine intervention. The Catholic channel, Sirius XM 129 presents Seize the Day. From Tampa, Florida, here's your host, Gus Lloyd.
Good morning, child of God.
Seize the day. Take charge and take a stand. 'Cause life flashes by like a shooting star in the nighttime sky. Seize the day. Open your heart to all God's grace. Then nothing stand in your way. Come seize the day.
Good morning, good morning, child of God.
Peace and blessings to you and yours, child of God. I am Gus Lloyd. Thank you for tuning in here on the Catholic channel on Sirius XM 129. So good to have you with me. I am so very honored by your presence here. And I want you to know that you are in my prayers daily. I pray for you and your family. I'm praying for health and safety and all good things, and that you and I will both be more and more aware of the mighty hand of God at work in our lives. So thank you very much for tuning in. Would you do me a huge favor? Pray for me, my family. Very blessed that you would do that as well. I hope you'll recommend Seize the Day to your friends and your family members. Let them know you listen. Invite them to be part of our family, because what we are is just a big old family around here, having some coffee talk across the breakfast table. Well, here we are on day whatever. I'm not even sure what day it is of quarantine and coronavirus. You know, it's funny because some folks have really been like keeping track of the days. I don't even remember what day it is, for Pete's sake, much less what number of day of quarantine we're in or anything like that. Hey, maybe like you, I am just taking things one day at a time. I'm just doing the best I can each and every day to do what I hope will honor God and what I feel God is calling me to do. Amen? Well, one of the things that is most loved here on Seize the Day on the program is a thing we call the Conversion Corner. And I have to admit, I'm in a little bit of a quandary right now, because my next guest actually is not a convert to the faith, but he has a pretty amazing story, and especially a pretty amazing vocation story, and much, much more. So I want to welcome to the program this morning Father Scott Van Devere. He's the pastor of St. Mary's Church in Xxiii, New York. Am I saying that right, the name of the town, Father?
Yeah, Xxiii. It's Native American. It's Mohican for the hooting of an owl.
Okay, Xxiii. There we go. Well, so Father Scott Van Devere joins me here on Seize the Day this morning. Well, Father, welcome to the program. It's great to have you. Thanks for tuning in.
To be here.
Okay, so before we get going, I just want to tell my listeners about the many connections that we have that you probably didn't know about. So first, some very faithful parishioners of yours, Michelle and Paul Bernasconi, have been friends of ours, my wife Michelle and I, friends of our family. In fact, we've known Michelle since she was just a young girl. So we've got that connection. And actually, Michelle was one of the people that was encouraging me to get in touch with you to have you share your story. And so the second connection here is even kind of neater. One of your best friends from seminary, which I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about, Father Kevin, is my cycling buddy. Father Kevin and I have been cycling together every week for years and years now. So Father Kevin Yarnell is, like you, one of your best friends. He's one of my best friends as well. So this really is a connection in the small world department, Father.
Thanks be to God. Thanks be to God. I love it.
Yeah, it's really, really neat. Okay, so I mentioned about how, we do a thing here on the program called the Conversion Corner, and you're not a convert to the faith, but you've got a very interesting story. So why don't you go ahead back to the very beginning and tell us a little bit about your early life and your growing up. You were cradle Catholic and grew up in a very Catholic family. How did that work for you?
Thank you. Yeah, I grew up in a family that had a ton of faith. My dad is a convert himself. He was raised in the Presbyterian church, and he never thought that he would convert. But when my parents went through the process of starting a family and realizing that they weren't biologically able to have children, they adopted me and my brother through Catholic Charities in my home diocese of Rochester, New York. And it was at my baptism in 1975 that my dad, who had said he would never convert, he was happy to go to church with my mom, happy to be one of those spouses sitting in the pews with their Catholic family. But he said that at my baptism, he had a real revelation that this was something that needed to be shared as a family, that this faith was not something that could grow in its fullness if he was kind of holding back and staying in his own little pocket with his own tradition. And so he actually went through the RCIA process as a result of his first son's baptism, which is really a touching thing in our family. But I was raised with a very strong relationship with God. I have a great aunt who was Sister of the Resurrection. All of my family members were really, really faithful. And so I was one of those kids that I didn't have an imaginary friend. God was in that role. So I was often talking to God, and I did not know that not everybody did that. I would say, God, what a beautiful tree. God, what should I do now? God, I don't want to eat these peas, or whatever it was.
Father, most people preface that with the word dear. Dear God, I don't want to eat these peas.
That's right. Absolutely. And I argued with God, I suppose, a little bit too. Like, it was a real relationship. And I think that for, like a lot of us, as I aged, as I got into my adolescent years, that relationship was put a little bit on the back burner. Not fully, but I certainly was not somebody who loved going to church. I mean, I had many conversations with my family where my mom would say, after all God does for you, 1 hour a week is not too much to ask. And I would say, but why does that hour have to be so boring?
And so long? Is it really just an hour?
It's like dog hours. It feels like forever.
Yeah, there you go. So you always had a very, a sort of a personal relationship with God, if you will, but you didn't always like the whole churchy thing. Did you go to Catholic school, by the way?
No, I didn't. And I was offered, my parents, there was not a Catholic parochial school option near us, but there was a Catholic high school option. But I didn't want to leave my friends. So I said no to that. And it wasn't until my senior year that I had a real revelation in this figuring out about my life. I went to church with a Catholic friend from high school who said, you would love my parish. You would love my priest. Really, the music is great. Why don't you come? Now, we were always very involved in our parish, so that wasn't very likely to happen. But my dad was on retreat one weekend with this men's retreat. So my mom said to me, hey, do you want to try that church that we were talking? Well, so we went. And I was meant to meet that priest, Father Jerry Appleby, who's now deceased. And I'll tell you what was going on in my life at that time. I had decided, I was a senior in high school, I decided that I wanted to be a journalist. I looked up to that iconic image of Walter Cronkite as the one who always was the first to know what was happening and then informed other people about it. So I remember, I wasn't alive yet when President Kennedy was assassinated, but that image of him taking his glasses off and saying to America, friends, I've got to tell you some very hard news. We're going to go through this together. The president died. And I thought that feels like that's what my calling is. I'm called to inform people. And then when I saw that priest using these incredible skills of communication, not to inform people, but to inspire people, it made me, it was like a revelation. I said, I'm not called to inform people. I'm called to inspire people. But I looked at him with admiration and awe, but also, if I'm fully honest, just a little bit of revulsion, because at 18 years old, I did not want to live that life.
Yeah. Now, when you say, Father, that you admired him and his kind of communication skills, was that because he was a great homilist and he just preached very well? Is that what really inspired you?
Yeah, I'll tell you, it was the homily primarily, but also the way he communicated deep faith through the way he would preside over the Eucharistic prayer. Every single word, this is my body, which will be given up for you. All of us knew he believed it so much that any of our faith that was at all weak or wavering was strengthened being in the presence of that. But his homilies, I'll never forget, right after I went to Mass there for the first time, it was Ash Wednesday, not long after, and I'll never forget him saying, this Ash Wednesday, this Lent, as you're thinking about giving alms to the poor, might you consider giving the thing that you think you might not be able to live without? He said, I challenge you, what about that sweater you got for Christmas that makes you look thin? And I'll never forget that at that time in my life, I was in the middle of a real battle with morbid obesity, which, praise be to God, I am now beyond. I am in recovery for compulsive overeating, and it'll always be something that I have to work through. But I'm no longer, actively in that life. And
Wow.
I was almost 300 pounds when he said that to me, and I had a sweater that people would say, "Are you losing weight?" Which is exactly what I needed at that time in my life. And when he challenged me, give that to the poor. Give that. Show your trust in God by giving away the thing that gives you your only bit of security. Those words are spoken in 1993.
And this is as an 18-year-old young man, right?
I was 18 years old.
Yeah.
To show how powerful that was, I started going to daily mass before I go to school in the morning. Senior year of high school, I would ask if I could borrow the car to go to daily mass at 6:30 in the morning before school started.
Wow. Amazing story. Father Scott Devere, by the way, is with me this morning, and I'm Gus Lloyd. Thanks for tuning in. You're on Seize the Day here on the Catholic Channel on Sirius XM 129. If I may, I don't know if this will jump forward or backward in the story a little bit, but you mentioned that, at the time you were 300 pounds, and, since that has kind of gotten itself worked out, did you have a lot of self-esteem issues and whatnot at that point in your life, Father? Is that sort of the underlying issue that was there?
Yeah, this is how I would describe it. I think it's very related to the exact wound that causes alcoholics to drink and people who are lonely to go to inappropriate websites. I think here's how I would describe it. I, like a lot of people, like all of us, have a God-shaped hole inside of me.
Yeah.
And I did not know how to fill it. And I did not, we don't know what to do with that. It's emptiness that's in us for a reason, but we don't know. And it's too painful to bear. And so I was trying to fill it with food. And so how many bowls of Cinnamon Toast Crunch does it take to fill the God-shaped hole? Probably as many as bottles of gin it takes to fill it,
yeah.
Or, hits of porn, or, things bought with credit cards. It can't be filled that way.
Yeah.
It can't be filled. It is there so that we never stop seeking God, so that it will not be satisfied. And it's like a keyhole that you can only turn with one key. And so I was pouring all the wrong things in there.
Sure.
I was trying to use food to fill it.
Yeah.
And so it gives me such compassion and connection with people battling addiction, wow. Which I believe with all my heart. First, I'm a recovering addict, food addict for sure. But I also believe that healing an addiction, doing battle with an addiction, is the highest spiritual work that we can do in this life.
Amen.
And it's the highest spiritual work. And that is why there is such deep spirituality, not only going on in our church buildings, but in our basements where our 12-step meetings are happening.
Yeah. And, actually, Father, I'm glad that you brought that up, because this is totally ancillary to your story and our conversation here. But, I got a missive from someone recently about how their 12-step program has been discontinued, banned, if you will, in this age of coronavirus. So I wonder if, since this is so close to your heart, and by the way, very close to my heart as well, I wonder if you could maybe speak to folks who are really struggling at this time because of the quarantines, because they can't get together with a support group, etc. What kind of message would you have for folks like that right now?
Thank you for saying that. Here's what I'm feeling. One is staying connected with recovery literature is so important. It's so important. And those things are anointed, and they steer people very wisely toward the path that they need to be on. A rigorous commitment to prayer is so important. One of the things that the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous said is that that's why we're always recovering from our addiction. We are recovering alcoholics or recovering food addicts. We're never recovered. And I used to really resent that. I would say, where's the progress? I don't like that. It doesn't feel right. But the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, Bill W., said that what we have in recovery from an addiction is not a cure. It is a day-by-day reprieve of our condition, contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition.
Right. And that's why it's one day at a time.
It is one day at a time. And I'm just so aware of, I realize that as a homilist too, though. I am only as good a homilist as I am a prayer. And I can never expect that God will give me the message to give the people that is so needed if I am not sitting every day in prayer. Yeah. And it's contingent. My ability as a homilist is contingent on the maintenance of my spiritual condition. And my recovery from food addiction is contingent on the maintenance of my spiritual condition.
Yeah. Father Scott,
so one more thing I will say, I am part of a 12-step group that is using Zoom right now.
Nice.
And it is powerful. It's powerful, and it's very different than being in a church basement. But it certainly is helping.
Yeah, and if I could add one more thing in there too, if you don't mind, Father, it's this, hopefully your sponsor or someone in your support group is just a phone call away. So never, ever be afraid to make that phone call, to reach out when you're feeling that need to reach out. Father Scott Van Devere is with me this morning. It's not our conversion corner, but he does have a fascinating story, and we're in the midst of it right now. And I'm Gus Lloyd. Thank you for tuning in on Seize the Day here on the Catholic Channel on Sirius XM 129. So 18 years old, you're enamored by this priest, and did you feel at this time a vocation to the priesthood? Did you think to yourself, wow, maybe God is calling me to do this?
What I felt was this. Oh, man.
Not this.
I thought, this, because a deep part of me, the deepest part of me knew this is my calling. This is what I was born to do. This is what God wants for me and of me. And I didn't want to do it. And I'll tell you, the reasons are many, but a lot of them are simple to understand, and they may not be the ones that come to mind first. Yes, the promises of celibacy and obedience and living a simple life, not poverty for a parish priest, but a life of simplicity. Those things are obviously they're the exact opposite of the power, sex, and money goals of society so often. So it's obvious that that's hard, but I'll tell you, those weren't the things that were making it extra hard for me. The things that I was running from, many of them are things that I still a little bit struggle with as a priest, like being told where I have to live. Living right next to the church might not be my choice. I might like a little apartment on the other side of town.
Sure.
Or,
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't like being told what to wear. You know what I'm wearing today? The same thing I'm always wearing. Black collar.
Yeah. So if I'm hearing you correctly, there's this sort of, I don't know if rebelliousness is necessarily the right word, but you don't like that whole vow of obedience kind of thing, right?
Oh, I think you're naming it. Those are all the obedience things. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And perhaps it is. Being born in the 70s, being I'm a late Gen Xer, and I'm an American, and my values are very much like independence.
Yeah,
live your dream, your goals. You decide, you create your life, and so I'm not even in charge of my name. My title is Father, and people call me Father, and I will tell you that. One thing that priests talk about, this is priest shop talk, but father is both a great honor, but it's a great burden. And I think family fathers know that. But I will tell you, one of the things that's really interesting with father is I have people that don't know me at all, but look at me with uncommon amounts of devotion and adoration and uncommon amounts of revulsion. When I walk into a room with my collar and my title Father, half the room loves me more than they ought to, or more than makes me comfortable, and the other half hates me for reasons I don't understand.
Yeah, wow, that's a really interesting point. Yeah.
And I think it's multiple. I think sometimes it's anger at the mistakes of the church. But other times it is that people have trouble. The relationship with a father can be a real tricky thing. A lot of people have issues with their father, even if their father's deceased. So there's some unresolved issues. I think a lot of father issues sometimes get projected onto our priests, and I feel it. I have to. The way I would describe it is I have to carry a lot of current. It's like there's a lot of voltage when I walk in a room, because there's people. There are some cultures where when a person meets a priest, they'll kiss my hands, and that's such an unusual thing for me, raised in a Polish American household.
Yeah. It's a little awkward, isn't it?
Oh, there's awkwardness to it, and it's not every culture, but that does exist. There's an awkwardness to it. And I've had to learn the submission of let them take my hand, because I have pulled my hand away and really hurt people without realizing it.
Yeah.
But yeah, to open myself up day after day to people who look at me and see their only highway to God on one hand, or somebody who represents repression and perversion on the other hand.
Yeah.
And that's really hard. And that's an example of something I don't every day want to be responsible for.
Yeah.
But I can't take a day off.
And yet now you are, but this wasn't always the case. Father Scott van Devere with me this morning here on Seize the Day, telling us first his vocation story. He's got a couple of other interesting aspects we're going to explore in just a bit as well. So 18 years old, you're feeling this call to the priesthood, but this isn't something that you were ready to say yes to. So where did you go from there?
I'd like to take you back to that story I told you about how I used to always talk to God all day long. Look at that tree. What do you think we should do? That came back at this moment in my life. When I was 18, suddenly the dialogue with God every day was back. And that was a great gift. But of course, here's what the dialogue sounded like now. God would say something like, in my heart, no words, of course, but God would say, so, as I was choosing my college, so. And I would say, no, come on, God, I've got a journalism is what I'm going for. Why don't I just get a journalism degree? You can do a lot of things with that. You can write, you can talk. I'll get a journalism degree, and then I can decide. So, of course, God, in infinite patience, as God always has, let me go off. But here's what changed. Suddenly now it was important that I went to a Catholic college. And because my values were changing, of the 6 colleges I applied to, only 2 of them were Catholic. So 4 of them were ruled out. So I wound up going to a Catholic college, St. Bonaventure University in Western New York State, a wonderful Franciscan school that I recommend highly. I was in a vocation group there. So I was staying in the process, but I reluctantly. When I graduated college, I felt God say, so, and I said, God, I haven't even been anywhere. I haven't traveled. I've lived in upstate New York my whole life. I've got to travel. So I entered the Up With People program. Gus, are you familiar with Up With People? Does that ring a bell?
Up, I can sing the whole song. Up with people, you meet wherever you go. Up with people, they're the best kind of folks we know. If more people were for people.
People everywhere.
How pathetic are we? I'm just asking.
I'm telling you, all right, 2 Super Bowl halftime shows in the 80s. Up With People was amazing.
I'll be darned.
So I just loved it. I got to travel all over the world. Lived in like 12 different countries, 150 host families. For those of you who don't know, Up With People is kind of like the Peace Corps with a show. It's kind of what it is. You go around the world doing community service projects, but as you do it, you live with host families everywhere you go, and you perform a musical show that is all about peace and cooperation and cultures working together. So it's a non-religious, non-political group, but very beautiful moral values. I traveled as part of a cast of 150 people from 26 countries, all aged 17 to 25.
Wow.
All idealistic. The term used for Up With People is uppies. We're uppies. So it was an amazing experience. I got to do so much. And people recognized me in that cast as being someone with a vocation. People would say, have you ever thought about going into ministry? Even if they weren't Catholic, even if they weren't, a lot of people called me Father Scott as a joke. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
It's amazing. So I do 2 years in Up With People, went all over the world, loved it. At the end of that, God said, so, and I was like, God, I've never had a job. Now that I've been in Up With People, I've seen all these things that I want to do. And one of the things that we had done as a volunteer project was raise money for this hospice house in, of all places, Newport Richey, Florida. We were in Newport Richey, Florida, and raised money for a hospice center. And I loved it. I'd had an incredible experience with a woman dying of cancer there. And I said, I'd love to do that, but I don't have a background for it. God said, what about this? And I wound up finding out about AmeriCorps Vista, where young people are able to take their college degree and put it toward something positive in the world that needs professional help. So in my case, there was a hospice house 2 hours from where I grew up in upstate New York, run by a Catholic church called Abraham House. And that hospice needed a grant writer. And I was a journalism major. I knew how to write grants.
Huh.
So there I went for a year. And here I am with the dying in this. I lived in a rectory in an intentional community with a priest, 2 nuns, a Vietnam vet, a theologian, and a Haitian refugee. All of us were living in this. It was a former convent that was turned into an intentional community because this parish had all these ministries and all of us were working in different ministries. Some in an orphanage, some in a soup kitchen, some in a home for at-risk teen mothers, one in a health clinic that brought doctors to do pro bono health care for people who lived in this impoverished neighborhood. It was just incredible.
Sure. So it sounds like then at this point in your life, even though you felt this kind of call to a vocation, you're sort of dancing around it. You're doing all these things that are very closely related to what invariably you would be called to do, but still God is being patient with you. I'll tell you, I got to take a quick break here. Can you hang on for just a second? We'll come back and finish your story.
Love to.
Stay with me then. Father Scott Devere with me this morning here on Seize the Day, telling us his vocation story. And you definitely don't want to go away because after we get to his vocation story, he's got another aspect of his life that is really, really interesting, a story that is continuing to play out. So keep it right here, Seizing the Day with you. More on the way with Father Scott Devere here on the Catholic Channel on Sirius XM 129.
There are many ways to seize the day. Not sure where to start? Well, we have the perfect guy to help you. Here's Gus Lloyd.
Welcome back, my friend. I am Gus Lloyd. You're on Seize the Day on the Catholic Channel on Sirius XM 129. We are in the midst of a fascinating vocation story with Father Scott Devere. He's a pastor in New York. And Father, forgive me, tell me the name of the town again in New York.
Well, actually, I'm really glad you gave me a chance to because it's Coxsackie. St. Mary's in Coxsackie, New York, which is just about 2 hours north of New York City. But I also want to give a shout out to my other parish, St. Patrick's in Ravenna, New York.
So you're pastoring two lots of priests are these days, aren't they?
That's right. That's correct. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I don't know any other way. I've only been a pastor of one assignment and it's with 2 churches. So I wouldn't know what it's like to have one.
There you go. All right. So let's pick up on your vocation story now. We got to the point where, you're 18. Now you've been in Up With People. You feel you're sort of dancing around this vocation idea, doing all kinds of different things, all sort of interestingly enough in a ministry aspect. So at what point did God finally say, all right, Scott, enough is enough. It's time to make the leap into the priesthood?
Yeah, here's what God did. God said, Scott, how about now? And I said, I've never lived my childhood dream to be a school bus driver. Come on, God.
You're kidding
Come
me.
on, God. God, I don't even have my CDL yet. Get serious.
Are you serious? A school bus driver?
I was a school bus driver. It was my dream job. Actually, I say somewhat tongue-in-cheek, somewhat seriously when people say, do you love being a priest? And I say, I absolutely do. It is the second best job I have ever had.
Next to being a school bus driver. Oh, my.
I love it. You know what? That's a retirement plan for me. I love driving a bus. It goes back to my earliest days. I don't know what it is. And when I see a yellow bus, my head turns, my heart stops. I love it.
That's so. Now, being a school bus driver, I mean, that's not a full-time gig, is it? Can that pay the bills?
Good question. No, it was no. But guess what happened? I had a great spiritual leader in the town I was living in, Utica, New York, where this hospice was. I had a housing situation. It's a long story I won't go into, but the priest said, I live in community with a couple other priests. I know you've been thinking about the priesthood. Why don't you take a year and live with us? Rent free. Not only did I get to live with 2 priests, one in jail ministry, one a busy pastor, but I got to drive school bus as a full-time career, and I had a cook and a housekeeper, Gus.
Wow. God is good.
There's nothing God can't do.
Amen.
There's nothing God can't do. Here's where the story starts to turn. God said, all right, so, and I said, but I've never lived in a big city. And patient God said, all right. And I got a job at a corporation working with foreign exchange students in Boston. First time ever, this is paying big bill, high rent, swimming in a big pond. And I didn't like it. I loved Boston, but I did not like the corporate structure, for reasons that are now obvious for me in my life now. I learned a lot there, though, but that was the first time that I said, this is not it. This will not do. And I thought, when is the last time that I felt truly alive and loving what I was doing? And it was when I was living in that rectory, driving school bus. I volunteered a lot at the parish. One of the things I did was their confirmation catechist got sick in the middle of the year and they needed a replacement. And so hey, I'm getting free rent. I'm not going to say no. I took over as catechist for that confirmation group, and I loved it. I was on fire. I was in the zone. And so I thought to myself, in Boston, what am I going to do? I got to get out of this corporate job. I loved teaching. I wonder if a Catholic school would give me a shot. I wonder if I could teach religion. I just loved that high school age group. I think I could do it. I've got to get somebody to give me a shot. So I got my resume together and a cover letter, and I sent it to every Catholic high school in the Archdiocese of Boston. And at that time in 2002, there were 55 of them. Can you imagine?
Wow.
55. Of those 55, 3 of them contacted me. 2 of them granted me an interview, and 1 of them offered me a job. And so that's where I went. And it was at a Cristo Rey network school, which is worth a whole nother show sometime. For those of your listeners who know what that is, they know exactly. It's an amazing program that allows inner city kids below a certain income level to not only go to a private Catholic school, but to work 1 day a week in a professional level corporate job. We're talking like PricewaterhouseCoopers, Goldman Sachs level jobs. They work in entry level, mailroom, reception, faxing and copying. But what it does, it pays them a real salary. But rather than go to them, it goes to pay their tuition to Catholic school. And when they graduate Catholic school, these kids from these disadvantaged backgrounds have a 4-year Catholic education in high school, but also a resume with 4 years of corporate work experience. And so by the time they graduate, 100% of our graduates were accepted to 4-year colleges.
Yeah. We've actually had folks from Cristo Rey Network on the program before. It is truly a great thing. So let's get to then, at what point did you finally say, okay, God, it's the priesthood, I'm in?
5 years of teaching I was so close. I was like this. And I thought to myself, is there any chance that I will be as effective as a priest as what I'm doing now? An hour a day with teenagers talking about you, God? Do you really want me to leave this? And I felt God say, this isn't what I made you for. It's close, but it isn't what I made you for. Yeah. And so then yeah. Of course, it takes time, and it took some humility. And so here's where the humility started. I moved back home to upstate New York. There were no high school religion teaching jobs available, so I took a job at middle school, gulp. But I taught there for 2 years, moved into a house of discernment at age 32, lived with other guys discerning the priesthood, applied, was accepted, and went to the seminary.
All right.
So there you go. So basically, it was 20 years. When I tell people, when they say, tell me about you becoming a priest, if I were to tell that in a minute, what I would say is, I knew that I was supposed to be a priest when I was 18, but I didn't want to do it. And I spent 20 years trying not to be a priest.
Yeah.
And I couldn't do it.
Now you wound up going to seminary at John the 23rd, which is a seminary for later in life vocations. Was that mandatory, or could you have gone to a seminary with guys from your own diocese, younger men?
Great question. I was right at that cusp age. I was 33 when I went, and John the 23rd accepts guys age 30 and older, but the median age when I was there was probably 55 or older.
Yeah.
So I was the youngest American candidate there at the time. I'll tell you what's wonderful about that. They have permission from Rome to waive some of the philosophy requirements. And that was a good choice for me, for the bishop to make, because I already had a master's in religious education from Boston College that I had to get as a result of my teaching. So I had a master's in theology. And so that allowed them to honor my background and give me credit for that. So I didn't have to go through the whole philosophy requirement. They were able to waive a few things and apply some of my classes. So I was able to go through the process in 4 years instead of what for other guys who are under 30 is always about 6 years.
Yeah. Well, praise God. And, it sounds to me, again, like you knew this for the longest time. You decided to kind of dance around it. And God, being a loving and patient God, said, okay, I'm going to let you dance around here for a little while longer until you finally gave in. And you were ordained to the priesthood when, Father?
In June of 2013. So this year I'll celebrate 7 years.
Yay. That's beautiful. Well,
yeah,
it truly is a great story. And I'm so glad, first of all, that you joined us to tell the story. Now, I do want to get into one other aspect of your life that is so very, very interesting. Tell us the story of your adoption. You found out at some point that you were adopted, and this is sort of a story still in progress. So tell us that story.
Thank you for asking. Yeah, this is a story that's really unfolding and developing right now. And so for a lot of my parishioners listening to this, they're going to get an update that they haven't heard until right now. But I was adopted at 3 days old, and I was a Catholic Charities baby, as was my brother. I have a brother 16 months younger, not biologically related. He's from a similar situation, though. My birth mother was a teenager, and pregnancy was unexpected. My parents had been trying for years to have kids. They had applied, but had been told by Catholic Charities at the time in 1975, we really don't have any babies available right now. Would you be open to raising a tween or a teenager? And they said, absolutely. We just know we're called to be parents. The shock came in April of 1975 when my mother got a call from the social worker and said, Mrs. Devere, I've got some surprising news. We have a birth mother who's currently in delivery. It is not going well. The baby has been in her birth canal for several days. This is the 70s, different level of technology.
Yeah.
We're not sure if this child will be born with developmental disabilities because of the rough birth. This is an unfolding story. Would you be willing to accept this child to be placed with you if the child were to have developmental disabilities? And my mother she paused and said, the words that came out of her mouth were, absolutely, that's our son. Absolutely, that's our son.
Wow.
Yeah, such beautiful, powerful words. I've asked her when she told me that story, did you check with Dad before you said that? But no, so I came home to them 3 days later. They had no nursery. They had nothing. They were expecting a teenager to come maybe in a year or two. And here they were with a baby who was 3 days old. And they never, ever, ever failed to tell me that I was adopted, which is, I urge anybody out there considering adoption, please consider that, because I know that there are some schools of thought that say, maybe you can tell the child when they're 16, when they can handle it, or, maybe tell them when they're the age of reason. I disagree completely. I was told during bath time, I was told before language that, and these are the words my mom would use as a refrain. You grew in another mommy's tummy, but you grew in my heart.
Mm.
And it's perfect. You know what? No child needs you to draw a diagram about that. That makes perfect sense to a child.
Sure.
Perfect sense. Not only that, I don't know where this resource is, but there was a beautiful resource that was by a Christian publisher that said, and this is a hilarious thing. And for your listeners, I ask you to just bear with me about how tongue-in-cheek this kind of is, but this is what it said. Mary had this unexpected moment where the angel told her she was having this unexpected pregnancy, and God wasn't able to fulfill the same roles as a human dad would. And so Joseph adopted Jesus, and Jesus is the first adopted child. And for an adopted child, this thing was I was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. I'm like Jesus, and everybody else, was born another way. So, I mean, for an adopted child, this was a great consolation. I was like, Jesus gets me. Joseph adopted him. So that was a really beautiful resource. I don't know where that exists now, but so I did not have issues about my adoption. I also, and this is really interesting, I was not very curious about my biological family. And I know that is not always the case for others. I know that many adopted children live with a real desire to fill in this gap of understanding about themselves. They feel like their identity is incomplete. I didn't feel that. As a matter of fact, I think I never really thought much about my biological father because I assumed that he just fled in fear. And I didn't blame him. I didn't have any anger toward him. I didn't really consider him much. And I think part of why this was possible for me is because I had such loving parents who are my parents and always will be. But I will say my biological mother, I would think of her at least 3 times a year on my birthday because I was very aware that she was thinking of me. I would think of her on Mother's Day because I was very aware that she was aware of that motherhood. Mm-hmm. And I would think of her maybe another time during the year, but much less than she probably would think. If she is out there and listening and is worried that, did he have a good life? Does he resent me? Absolutely not. That's the message I would love to give her. You gave me a gift. You were courageous. You were courageous. I was born in the era after Roe v. Wade. She could have made another choice and she didn't. Yeah. And so I have nothing but respect and gratitude to her. And my parents would say the same. Here's where the story is in progress. And if my parishioners are listening to this, they're going to be a little mad that I haven't told them this. But it is a story that is so new and in progress. It is unfolding. So I think it's not ready for homilies yet, but it will be soon and someday. One thing that an adopted child lives with is always a real curiosity about their ethnicity, because we don't really know that. So often you don't know what your ethnicity is. And I was raised in a family that's Dutch and Polish. Devere is my last name. So my dad's Dutch, but long time ago immigration, which means they've been in America for 400 years. And that feels very American. My mother, however, is the daughter of Polish immigrants, and so Polish was the food and the culture I was raised in. I have a babci, and my jaji died before I was born, but all of these Polish family cultural cues were always what I followed. So I went on Ancestry.com, Gus, which I have to warn people, be sure you're careful about that. Yeah. Because amazing things can happen. I didn't realize I'm not really a TV watcher. I have 2 parishes. I'm busy. I don't really watch TV, so I hadn't seen the commercials. I just thought that was a good way to find out your ethnicity. But if you just agree to the terms and conditions, they will share your information with anybody else who's in their system who has your DNA. And I didn't know that. To be honest with you, I would have chosen to withhold that information. But now I'm glad I didn't. But I would have, because I would have liked the anonymity of finding out what my ethnicity was without any complication. But guess what? I said, accept all terms and conditions. And I went on Ancestry and I found out some amazing news. I am 95% Irish. Wow. Something I've never known before. And never up with people. We never went to Ireland. It's a country I've never been to. I've never connected with that. So it turns out I'm intensely Irish. So Irish, I can get an Irish passport if I'm willing to do the work.
No kidding. Oh, I didn't know that. Huh. Just from knowing that from Ancestry, huh?
Because my grandparents were born there.
Okay.
That's something I'm thinking of pursuing. But it also meant that a day after I got my information about my DNA, I got a message from a woman in Buffalo, New York, who said, I think you may be my brother. She said, my father found out after the fact, but he didn't know that he'd fathered a child in Rochester, New York in the 70s. She named the birth mother in that and said, I know this is a mind blower. I don't know, but you came up as a match for me. If you happen to be my brother, I would love to meet you. If not, that's okay too. I'm an only child. I have a very close-knit family, and you can stalk me on Facebook if you want. And so I'm not on Facebook, so like a lot of priests aren't. And so I turned to friends and said, please stalk her for me. And it turned out she looked wonderful. Soon after that, my biological father reached out and said, I don't know how to go about this, but I want you to know that I would love to know about you. He didn't know that I existed. And now let me tell you just a little bit about this man. He goes to daily mass. He goes to daily mass every day. He's from a family of 6 children that were raised with deep faith. They are all involved in faith and spirituality. They're lovely people filled with love. He has had a father's heart throughout his life. He said he tried not to obsess about me, but when the Gulf War was happening in the 90s and he realized I was old enough to serve, he worried about me. What if that son I fathered is out there? When September 11th happened, he had said he always had a mental picture that I was living in New York City and working in a tower. He'd always pictured that. And so when that happened, he had nightmares that I died. He has had a father's heart throughout this time. And this, Gus, here's where things get just crazy. The family back in Ireland is littered with priests to the point that, according to one report, there are, in the past 2 generations above me in Ireland, in this family and its line, 11 priests.
Wow.
11 Catholic priests. So 11. So I'm number 12 in a line. Now, and when you hear my story and then you hear that, isn't that just remarkable? How much of this did God weave into our very selves?
And there's
our callings.
There's something very biblical too about the fact that you're number 12. I don't know that whole 12 thing, you know. No, seriously.
You can say it. I can't because it's a little too much.
It's just that is just an amazing story. Well, I don't know where the story goes from here, and I'm not sure that you know where the story goes from here, but I suspect that God has a few more surprises up his sleeve for you. Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. So maybe, you know what? Maybe you'd be willing to have me back when the story's a little more in progress, and I can share with your listeners exactly where it's going to go. Because I will say, I don't know where it's going, but I know it'll be beautiful.
I know it will be beautiful too. Father, what an amazing story. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Listen, I'm out of time this morning. You have been just a delight to have on the show. Before I let you go, though, would you be so kind as to offer my listeners your priestly blessing this morning?
Absolutely. To all those listeners out there, during this time of worry and concern about coronavirus, in this time when our moorings have been lifted, we are adrift on a sea of uncertainty, and we are worried about every aspect of our survival. We are worried about the fact that our faith has to be expressed so differently now that so many of us are unable to receive the Eucharist due to safety concerns. In this time when we are called upon to become, like our ancestors, the great generations of the past, people who are willing to sacrifice whatever it takes for the well-being of those generations yet unborn. May we all be filled with all of the gifts of the Holy Spirit and all of the divine strength God can cram into us so that we can meet this challenge with faithfulness and hope and love. And I offer my blessing upon all of you in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Father. Look forward to having you back sometime in the future so you can finish this still unfinished story that God is working in your life. Father Scott Van Devere with me this morning here on Seize the Day, telling us about his vocation story, how he ran from God for a while, but God finally got a hold of him. Now he's been a priest for a number of years in Coxsackie, New York, got 2 parishes, and also finding out about his adoption through his ancestry. We will keep you posted on that in the future. I'm Gus Lloyd. More Seize the Day is on the way. Thanks for tuning in. You're on the Catholic Channel on Sirius XM 129.